Welcome to Americana Archives. Today's story comes from the great state of Oregon, being reported in the Coast Mail of November 22nd, 1879. Today we have a story entitled My Diamond. It says, I could give you the pedigree of the stone, but the details are so long and so many, they might tire you. Sufficient to say, that I bought it many years ago from an old dealer in the lower part of Broadway, who told me a curious story concerning it. He said that it was a talisman, that 400 years ago it was owned by a Venetian family of ruined fortunes who long guarded it with jealous care. It had passed from them in many ways to brothers of his in the money-lending way, and should be mine if I gave him his price for it. In truth, the stone had a strange and fiery gleam. At the first glance, it seemed of the purest water. In an instant, it changed to pink, blue, and pale green, and then iridescent opal hues, emitting sparks of fire. I watched it curiously for nearly an hour, talking irrelevantly the while of other matters, and reluctantly coming to the conclusion that if ever a precious stone possessed uncanny properties, this one certainly did. I thought myself yielding to foolish superstition, or that my eyes were tired with long gazing at the gem, and to rest them I turned my glance to other diamonds in the case, to compare them with the talisman. The dealer evidently divined my thought, for he took from his side pocket a wallet, and opened it, and from a compartment brought out several tissue paper packets, opened them, and showed to me large and sparkling diamonds. There is not one like that you have in your hand, he said. He was right. All were bright in their glittering flash and merciless gleam, wondrously beautiful, but all were unlike the talisman. Why do you sell it, I asked. With all this wealth, you cannot need money, and if what you tell me of its talismanic property be true, the gem is priceless. I wish to sell it if you had the courage to buy, he made answer. I wore the diamond for more than 5 years, at first in a ring, afterward in a shirt stud, and then in a ring again. It now encircles the finger of a lovely lady whose little girl calls me Papa. All this time there have been no tragedies in our family. No dear friend has died. My own health has been excellent, and I am quite resigned to have it put down to imagination on my part, that to me, my stone is bright or dull, according to my prospects ahead. Only this I affirm, that twice, when to test it, I went contrary to its warning. The punishment quickly followed the offense. Once I speculated in Pacific mail, and lost heavily, and once I asked a sweet lady friend to be my wife, and she refused me. Superstitions were not, as you will. I regard my diamond as my talisman, my mentor, and ever since my unsuccessful wooing, I have looked upon it with love, not unmixed with awe. One morning, when riding downtown in a Madison Avenue car to my business, I looked up from my paper, conscious of a pair of eyes fixed steadily on me. Opposite was a lady of about 20 years, dressed in soft, somber gray, the only bit of color to relieve it, except the bloom in her refined face, was a bit of red, low down beneath the brim of her gray felt hat. Her eyes were light, lustrous brown. Her hair, much darker and glossy, was brushed back in waves from her low forehead, upon which a curl or two fell. Not the detestable bangs, which I frankly state I abhor, but short, graceful, fringe-like ringlets that rested upon the white brow as if they loved it. There was no doubt about it. This rare and radiant maiden was gazing at me. I looked at her in return with a face I tried to make expressive of nothing, certainly not curiosity. She glanced down again at her book, Daniel Deronda. I returned to my telegraphic dispatches in the Herald. Again I felt her gaze, and again I looked up and met her eyes. She evidently wanted to speak to me, or else had something on her mind concerning me. Had I ever seen her before? I asked myself. No. She seemed too modestly sweet to wish to attract the attention of a stranger. Perish the thought, I said inwardly. But she was certainly looking at me again. I am not a bad-looking fellow, and as men go, not a bad sort. I have always been popular with my lady friends, and I returned her look this time with one of interest, and I am afraid I smiled. Instantly her face clouded. She bent over her book and bit her lip angrily. I turned to my paper, but not to read. Once more I looked up, and my fair vis-a-vis. She was steadily gazing at me. I could have sworn to it. Oh, my talisman, you failed me then, but the fault was mine. I did not seek your advice. Just at this moment, the conductor came hurriedly to the front of the car to speak to the driver. As he was returning, the lady in gray said to him in a low voice, every word perfectly audible to me, and as chilling as an iceberg, "Conductor, the gentleman opposite me is losing his diamond." I flushed to the roots of my hair, felt for the stone, and discovered that it was hanging by the spiral screw, and so nearly out that a quick movement would have sent it down into the meshes of the car mat. I replaced it securely, bending back the wire for greater safety, and then cast an imploring look of apology, gratitude, and humiliation upon the kind stranger. Her face remained placid, but after a moment a demure smile stole into the corners of her mouth, and I don't think it was by what she saw in her book, or that she was reading very attentively. She left the car at 14th Street, and I gazed eagerly after her as she turned up to Broadway, and then I must have sighed. Perhaps because I feared I should never see her again. What more natural than for me to desire to know her? It was so kind and so sensible of her to prevent me losing my diamond. She was such a gentle-looking creature, though she had spirit, as I saw once in the gleam of her eyes, and those eyes were so expressive of intellectuality, and her perfect nose was only less beautiful than her perfect carnation mouth. But need I apologize now for my interest then? It does not take any of us very long to discover that. Love never asks the question why. As the old song says, she had gone from my gaze like a beautiful dream. If I could only meet her again. Perhaps she was married. Not that it was any of my business, but somehow she did not look married. She was girlish in spite of her dignity. One thing I discovered, there was a name on the flyleaf of her book, the first of which was Maud. Perhaps the book was not hers. And it was, could I hope to find in a great city like New York a lady only knowing that her name was Maud? When I had arrived at this stage of common sense, I had reached my place of business, and after attending to the first duty of the day, reading my mail, my thoughts flew back to my lady in gray. If the thing were within the bounds of possibility, I would like to find out who she is, just to thank her for her kindness to me. How like a jackass I must have appeared to her. When I remembered my impertinence in smiling, I would have been glad to have found some obliging friend to kick me downstairs for my idiocy. I bowed to the inevitable and dismissed the affair with a sigh, but I did not forget her face. One rainy afternoon, about a month after, I met her in a Broadway stage. I recognized her in a moment and took a seat, the only one vacant, by her side. I looked into her face, and I know she remembered me, but she did not exhibit the faintest gleam of consciousness of my existence. It was worse than Tantalus and the torments. Before she left the stage, the rain fell in torrents. I hoped that she was not provided with an umbrella, that I might offer her the protection of mine, but a glance showed me that she held one in right hand. My unfortunate luck again. I looked down at my diamond. It sparkled like the sunbeams, and as joyously, but its dazzle conveyed no intelligence to me, only it gave me a gleam of hope. She was so near that I could easily have played a trick, like that which a friend of mine once played, slip a card into her cloak pocket. Nothing of that kind would go down with this queenly creature I perfectly well knew. I was forced to watch her again leave me and turn down the street, holding her dress so dexterously that it quite escaped the pavement and disclosed two neatly fitting little boots. Perhaps I should have said before this, my name is Eldridge, that I am a lawyer and Judge Clinton's junior partner. In the next office to ours, there are two young fellows, just started in law, who receive more calls from their lady friends than retaining fees from their clients. One day, as I was leaving my office, I saw my lady in gray going into theirs. I must confess to feeling a sort of chill and then disappointment. I did not like to know that my dignified unknown went around visiting gentlemen's offices, even though the gentlemen were her acquaintances. Occasionally, a lady friend would call upon me, not upon business, and although I was always polite, I never encouraged that sort of thing, and as a practice, I heartily disapprove of it. My second thought was more charitable. One of the fellows might be her brother. So much the better. I would make his acquaintance and cultivate him. I did this after some weeks' delay and considerable circumlocution on my part, and learned that the elder of the two men, Mr. Allen, had a sister named Maud, and that she was engaged to his friend and partner. Just think of my dismay. Actually engaged to the other fellow. I was sad enough to know she was bound, but I raged thinking of her as the wife of a fellow who had no ambition and less brains. There was nothing in the man, absolutely nothing. Why, only a week before, he had shown a lack of legal acumen in a case, a mere technicality of which the rawest student should not have been ignorant. I looked at my ring after my disturbed thoughts, and its rosy gleam gave me fresh courage. After reflecting a day, I resolved to remorselessly and determinedly cut him out, if I could. It was quite in my power to be of service to Mr. Allen, and in return, he asked me to his father's house for dinner. So I saw my lady Maud at home, and there where true women shine best, I found her more sweet and womanly than she had looked before. I had prepared myself for our first meeting, but she had not, and betrayed a little embarrassment. I did not, however, refer to our adventure until I had called upon her several times, and then I ventured to thank her for coming to the rescue of my precious diamond. She begged me, with deep pink in her cheek, not to mention it. I was assiduous in my attentions, and laid siege to the hearts of the rest of the family, and quietly begged to woo. That I had some influence over her was proved by the fact that her betrothed became jealous of me and forbade her from receiving my visits. She rebelled, after bearing with long annoyance from him, and finally dismissed him. I ventured to ask her, like a hypocrite, why I no longer met Mr. Furbish at her home. Not that I am pining for his society, I added with a shrug. We have broken our engagement, she said, looking at the carpet. I consulted my talisman. Blessings upon it, it fairly danced in the light. The temptation was strong, but I resisted it, to beg her to give me the hand he had lost. I waited till one evening, when I was escorting her home from the theater, and I told her the story of my ring, and she believed in its magic more firmly than I did. It has never failed me yet, Miss Allen, and I am longing to put it to a stronger test. She was so provokingly demure and unconscious that I kept back the petition on my lips, for I felt my courage, like Bob Acres, oozing out of my finger ends, and again I wilted. I should think you would be afraid of losing it, she said, a few days after. She was holding the ring in her hands, moving it this way and that way to catch the gleams. Do you know, Miss Allen, that I am constantly afraid of losing it ever since I met you? Then I grew bold and took her hand and said, Please keep it for me. Let me put it on this finger. Please do. And give me yourself in return. She hung her head and blushed and stammered a little, but she did not say no. Thank you for joining us today. Remember before you leave, if you want to see more of America's lost and forgotten history, to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.